The swamp held my ankle. The water stopped pretending to be asleep, and when the surface opened in a V, I understood. Either I learned the predator's rhythm now, or I became silence forever. The farm was at the end of a gravel road in southern Florida, where the pasture meets the swamp and the water holds a warm breath that never sleeps. The barbed wire fence ran straight until it disappeared into the cypress woods, and behind it, the land sank into dark patches, as if the soil were breathing beneath the mud. It was early summer, the air thick as syrup, and the frogs sang a lazy chorus that only stopped when something larger passed nearby. That day, I was searching for a missing calf, following light footprints that ended in a tongue of stagnant water, oily in the shade of the tupelo trees. There was a different sound in the swamp. It wasn't wind or bird. It was the noise of the world being pushed sideways. The surface opened in a short V and closed like a compliant wound. The smell suddenly changed. The sweet mold turned to warm metal, and I felt the promise of a storm on my tongue, though no clouds were in sight. I scanned the banks, the tussocks of sawgrass, the fallen trunk that looked like a tired alligator. Nothing. Just the still water and the sudden silence of the frogs, broken by a single nervous call of a water hen. That's when the calf bellowed, a baby sound edged with panic, and the bellow was pulled like a wool thread into an invisible hole in the fabric of the afternoon. I stepped in with my boot to my shin and sank deeper than I expected. The swamp has these little kindnesses. It looks like ground until it reminds you that it's a throat. I took 2 more steps, groping the soft bottom, and touched a dead fence post, slick with slime. The bellow came again, deeper, followed by a dull shake, like heavy leather striking wood. Then I saw it. First, just a dark curve beneath the layer of leaves. Then a pattern of spots, dirty green and black, that moved without haste until an eye the size of an old coin broke the surface and calculated me slowly. It was too big for me to measure with my usual yardstick. It was an anaconda, and it was close enough for me to feel the water grow colder around its head. The first strike isn't a leap, it's a disappearance. The eye vanished, the water closed, and the world for a moment lost its edges. The attack came from the side, a whip of muscle striking my knee, knocking me down with a thud that pushed the air out as if someone had stepped on my chest. The mouth hit mud where my leg had been just a second before, and I rolled by instinct, my arm searching for roots, my hand finding only the treacherous slickness of the mud. The calf, a few paces ahead, was already surrounded by thick coils moving like a twisting ankle, tightening and waiting for the heart to decide to give up. I screamed without words, that sound which is nothing but throat and need. The swamp returned the scream in bubbles. The snake raised its head 1/2 meter away, its tongue tasting my panic, and the world tightened around my neck without anything touching me. I remembered the machete in its sheath behind my waist. I pulled it out, the mud clinging, and in my panic almost let the blade slip away. The anaconda doesn't hurry. It measures. It slid another coil over the calf, the little creature's skin cracking beneath the force like a green branch. The brown water swirled around her body in arabesques of power. Then the tail hit my ribs, a blow without bone and with all the intention, throwing me sideways with the ease of sweeping dust off a step. I understood the swamp's order. If I stayed in the plane of the water, I would become part of the snake's mathematics. I lifted half my body, planted my boot on what seemed to be a cypress stump, and gained enough height to breathe air that wasn't borrowed. The head came again, an inch from my knee, and I saw the teeth not to tear, but to hold saw-like ridges turned inward, a catalogue of points to prevent retreat. The tongue flicked the air, and the skin around the mouth glowed like wet tile. "Look at me," I said, not knowing to whom. Perhaps to myself, perhaps to the creature. And I watched the rhythm, not the eye, the rise and fall, the pause before the advance, the undulation of the neck that revealed the side of the strike. When she broke the water for my left flank, she brought the weight of the world with her. I threw my body to the right and swung the machete in a short arc, aiming more behind the head, where the skin folds into a V. The blade bit into skin and struck hard muscle, slipping in cold slime before gaining an honest inch. It wasn't a strike to kill. It was to remind by force that there was more force. The water turned within itself, the whole swamp stirred by an ancestral muscle. The coil around the calf loosened just a bit, a sigh of slack, and it was enough for the little creature to draw air and bellow again, alive and off-key. The snake turned its head and came for me, a straight line impossible in a body of curves. Retreating would have meant turning my back on the wrong story. I advanced a step, planted my knee on the root, lifted the machete, and instead of striking, I pushed the blade like a wedge, seeking soft skin behind the jaw. The mouth opened. Its breath was of rotten fish and hot iron, and for a moment the world was just the sound of my own breath trying to fit back into my chest. The tail searched for me again, and I held my breath, for I had learned by watching rumors turn to legends. Those who exhale lose space inside. The blow hit my hip and almost extinguished the light of day. I gripped the root, the machete caught between skin and intent, and I felt the snake twist, a force without malice and without pity, only certainty. The water, complicit, tried to carry me away, but the root stayed with me. And in that stubbornness, I opened one more inch, just enough to turn pain into decision. The calf, in a raw miracle, turned its head the right way and buried its snout in the shallow mud. The snake, forced to choose, chose me. The strike came low, skimming the water's surface, and the head cut through the midday light like a knife without a handle, straight and inevitable, an arrow of muscle aimed at my nearest mistake. The machete was still lodged behind the jaw, and pulling it out would be to lose the only nail holding the door slightly ajar. I gripped the blade with both hands and twisted it like turning an old safe's key, feeling the leather give in rings of silent pain, an internal snap, elastic and warm, that traveled through the bones to my ear like private thunder. The anaconda coiled around my leg with the first turn, the weight of the world descending from my shin to my heel, pulling everything I thought was mine off the ground. The swamp, accomplice and judge, climbed up my chest with the smell of iron and rotting leaves. Each squeeze had method. It pressed in rhythm with my heartbeat, waiting for it to fail before squeezing again, an ancient arithmetic drawn at the edge of death. I remembered the trick the old foreman taught during the boar season. When the big thing measures you by your breath, change the rhythm of your chest. I held my breath in short bursts, exhaled in broken sighs, scrambling the clock that was condemning me. The tail searched for my waist with the patience of one who had won before, and I found with my fingers in the mud a root's grip that fit between the knots of my bones. I shoved my hand in, made the trunk a bracelet, and pulled with everything to gain an inch of ground. The next coil tested my rib. I felt an internal cold, a threat of silence beginning from within, and I drove my knee into the fold of the snake's body, a living wedge, pulling another sigh of slack. It was a battle of wood and water, me, root and iron, her, muscle and certainty. The calf, momentarily forgotten by fate, moved its hind legs in blind paddles and found something solid, a patch of grass, whinnying a rough sound of life insisting. The anaconda diverted its gaze, which wasn't really an eye, but calculation, and in that shift of attention, I pushed the blade another inch, seeking the nerve the county biologist swore existed, a thin road between the thick skin and the will to continue. I felt the vibration change. It wasn't a scream, it was silence changing sides. The water embraced my neck, and I understood I was too low, too deep, too close to her house to ask for courtesy. With my free hand, I felt my waist and found the small pocket knife, useless in size but fitting the purpose. I opened it with my teeth, its short blade made for rope and apples, and cut my own boot side, freeing my ankle from the sock the mud had already claimed. The coil tightened again. Something snapped, maybe pride, maybe the cartilage of the promise I had made not to die in that swamp. That's when the sound came that seemed invented, but was help. The old engine of the neighbor's ATV, Harold, coming down the matted straw trail, in no rush to be a hero, but with all the rush of the world. He didn't shout my name. He turned off the engine before the edge, respected the border like someone tipping their hat to the father's table, and came with the thick rope in a wide loop, firm steps in the mud, as if the farm had trained his feet for that minute. "Breath in short," he said, as if he'd heard my thought, and placed the loop behind the snake's head in the same V where my machete had acted as a wedge. "Pull on 3. Never has the number 3 meant so much in a life." 1. The air flew away, taking with it the fear that still lingered. 2. The world narrowed to the width of the blade and the loop. 3. Harold pulled. I twisted the wedge, the root groaned, and the head lifted an inch from the water, taking the ground from the anaconda that was bigger than me. The coil on my chest loosened just enough for the heart to remember to beat on its own. The calf, in a crooked leap, fell onto the grass and lay there, trembling like a fishing pole in the mouth of a piranha. The snake didn't give up. It returned to the swamp with the rest of its body, trying to take us all along in the wet gravity's equation. Harold planted his heels, the rope sang a lament of sisal, and I, seeing the window close, jerked the machete with a wrench that left my hand tingling up to my shoulder. Dark blood, almost green in the brown light, stained the water around the jaw. It wasn't victory, it was a warning. The anaconda twisted its trunk in a spiral that muddied the swamp, and I rolled onto the grass bench, coughing mud and broken promises. "Let go," Harold said, and it wasn't for the snake, it was for me. I let go of the impulse to chase with more blade. The head disappeared, the loop stretched and slipped, and the water, offended, raised a wall that soaked us from knees to waist, cold and definitive. Then everything stood still, as if someone had turned off the world's sound. Only my breath made noise like a small creature. The calf, alive, cried softly, an embarrassed bleat, and lay with its twisted legs in the grass, its gaze fixed on the beyond that saves. Harold pulled me by the collar, and the edge of the swamp turned into ground again, the most beautiful transition I have ever seen. His hand slapped my shoulder twice, not out of affection, but as a count. 1, we're here. 2, we stay. The swamp, polite, accepted that this chapter would end like this, without a photo, without a trophy, without a speech. It was only when the silence unraveled into frogs and ducks that I felt the pain. A band burning around my chest, my hip throbbing in the wrong rhythm, the skin of my leg marked by a map of purple that the next day would tell its own version of the story. I sat, wiped mud from my eye with my palm, and looked at the water. Nothing, no circle, no trace. Just an opaque mirror reflecting a man smaller than he wanted to be and bigger than he should have been. "Let's get the truck," Harold said, simple as talking about bread, "and come back with more rope and less hurry." I laughed inside. That's where we laugh when we've understood something big. It wasn't a hunt, it was border maintenance. The anaconda had done its part. We needed to redo ours. We returned with the truck. More rope than sense, 2 lariats, and a plan that could fit in 3 lines. Rescue the calf, guarantee my skin, and return the water to whom it belongs, without turning the swamp into a stage for bravado. The swamp looked different under the slanted sun, lighter and more deceptive, because the light here invents depth where there is only shadow. We tied the rope between 2 cypress trees, forming a Y that gave an angle to lift the snake's head without dragging half the world along. Harold, who understands boundaries with creatures, repeated the mantra that's worth more than ammunition. Lasso the V behind the head, no shouting, no running. Don't give her the decision of rhythm, because in murky water, whoever dictates the beat controls the story. The calf twitched its ears in tiny tremors, its body a map of recent bruises, but its eyes had returned from the place they sometimes go when death calls by name. I covered it with a tarp, left fresh water in a basin, and stepped back 2 paces, teaching panic the way back to the barn. The water, either polite or offended, said nothing, only held a heavy silence, the kind that precedes the big creature's choice between confrontation and evasion. And, as if answering a question that wasn't asked, the surface drew the lazy S that signals a warning. Then the edges vanished, an old message that the house still had an owner present. Harold waded to his knee, the loop open like an honest question, and I stayed on the main rope, ready to gain height at the right moment. The first touch was on nothing, The second looped shadow, the third brushed scales and released, until the fourth, patient, settled in the exact place, feeling beneath the sisal the topography of the force that inhabits an anaconda's neck. "On 3, he said again, and on 3 the head rose an inch, enough to steal from the snake the advantage of the water's ground, and the tail, irritated, whipped our knees in a lash that left a memory to the bone. We didn't respond with noise, we responded with angle, pulling diagonally so as not to offer a fixed point for the embrace. The anaconda tried the math of the squeeze, but found emptiness beneath the jaw. And emptiness is what swamp creatures don't negotiate. It twisted its trunk in a heavy spiral, the water turned to soup of roots and leaves, and the rope sang its rough hymn of taut fiber, until the loop settled beyond chance, firm as an old commitment. "Hold," Harold said softly, and I held on, my hands burning, my shoulder scraped by the fire of the rope, while he came from behind with the second loop to strip the tail of its authority over the helm. We didn't tie a tree, we tied a decision, because blind dragging turns into tragedy in a straight line. It was then that the choice happened on the right side. Instead of fighting, the creature sought the exit, measured depth with its body, found the corridor between two islands of grass, and slid with the dignity of those who belong, taking with it the shock and leaving us only the task of releasing the hand that urgency closes. We released the loop at the right time, before the fiber became a blade, and the head disappeared like a blown-out candle, without scene, without applause, the swamp returning to being a dirty mirror of what looks into it. We carried the calf to the truck bed, and it made the small sound of those who decide to live without asking for permission. The blood in the water dissolved into weak tea, and the frogs resumed their interrupted conversation, an amphibious diplomacy that seals armistices without minutes. Sitting on the bumper with the sun setting on my shoulder, we discussed the changes that come when you learn for real. Better fence the pastures near the edge, remove bait and scraps from the water's reach, train the new ranch hand to recognize the pattern of danger in the swamp's mirror, and above all swap haste for protocol, the only way to live next to a wet empire without wanting to own it. We didn't call the news, we didn't take a photo. We called the county wildlife officer, recorded the encounter, and received the guidelines that separated vanity from survival. Report sightings, don't capture without a team, don't feed, and remember that, in the Everglades and surrounding areas, the border between our farm and the others' homes is drawn by water, not by paint. In their report it was, encounter with large constrictor, no serious injuries. In my chest it was something else, a renewed signature on the swamp's contract, written in thick silence and signed by the sound of my own breath, returning to rhythm. The following days smelled of disinfectant, dry mud and leather curing in the sun, and every breath reminded me of the rope burning the palm, a memory that the body repeats to not forget the price of the shortcut between fear and method. The calf healed slowly, limping like a promise paid in installments, and the new fence rose 2 inches above vanity, with fine mesh down to the ground, because a good boundary starts where the swamp stops pretending to be land. Harold brought thin coffee and full silence, the kind of visit that doesn't need to say you're welcome, when life has already answered thank you in the language the swamp understands. The county paperwork arrived too, instructions rewritten in black and white. Report large constrictors, avoid disposing of carcasses that invite the improper, never enter the water alone, call the right team before the shock turns into a story with the wrong ending. And remember that by law and judgment, what is wild isn't faced with pride but with protocol. The officer explained that the region had known both invaders and powerful natives, and that the manual exists because human memory is shorter than the flood season, even though the temptation of improvisation is as long as the dry season. We signed without ceremony because in that place, a signature meant no more than the commitment a hand promises when it lets go of the camera to hold the rope the right way. In the swamp, life returned its noises like a store opening its doors at dawn, and the mirror of water, when it wasn't lying, spoke truths sparingly. Small circles of fish, thick shadows far from the edge, and that lazy S that, from time to time, warned that the house was still inhabited by those who know how to be without apologizing for existing. I didn't return with a knife in hand. I returned with attentive eyes and slow steps, measuring the edge like one measures fever in a child. No rush, no panic, no unnecessary poetry. The swamp accepted, and by accepting, it taught again that respect isn't fear. It's the correct distance measured with a ruler of silence. When someone asks how it was to survive an anaconda attack on the farm, the urge is to invent movie metaphors, but the right answer fits in your pocket. Understand the rhythm, gain height, use the heads of others, heralds, those who wrote the rules, and refuse the heroism that demands an audience. Shout less, lasso better. Pull on 3 and know when to let go are verbs for those who want to grow old at the same address, where they almost stayed forever too young. And if the question comes with laughter of disbelief, there's always the purple scar on my hip to translate the chapter the water wrote on my skin, with no need for subtitles. In the barn, I hung the machete not as a trophy but as a reminder that a good tool only serves when it holds vanity by the handle, and beside it I left the rope, washed and dried, with the knot trained until it became part of the hand, because repetition is the opposite of bad luck in the land of the swamp. At the gate, a new sign with simple letters summarizes the house's policy. Edge is not a shortcut. Stop, think, report. A message for the ranch hand, the visitor, and for me tomorrow, who always forgets a bit of what yesterday learned the hard way. Hand on the other side, where the water sometimes pretends to be land when it wants, a light trace occasionally appears and disappears, like the discreet signature of a neighbor who prefers a good morning to a pat on the back. If this story found a place within, sign up for the next tale. Here the night has more chapters than we imagine.